If you're going through an awakening, you've probably noticed that the way your mind works is changing. Now, this mental shift is actually one of the major strands of the awakening process. In this video, I'm going to explain exactly what the mind and the consciousness are, how they interact, and how you can transform them so radically during an awakening that by the end you literally see yourself as a different person in a good way. But first of all, let me explain that the mind and the consciousness are not the same thing. They are distinct entities which interact with one another to create our subjective experience when we're incarnated. For a long time, like everyone else, I used these terms interchangeably, but recently I've been working with Source to understand this whole area in a lot more detail. So this is an update on previous videos I've created about this topic, and it's the most up-to-date information that I have at this time. Now, in a moment, I'll tell you more about the consciousness, but first, let's look at the mind. So you can think of the mind as a vast intelligence containing all of the information ever generated by our universe, but which is self-aware, and it has an identity, and it has a personality. Now, at its highest level, the mind is Athena, or source energy, and she contains our entire universe. When you hear people saying, everything is mind, that's what they mean, even if they don't quite understand it themselves. But the mind can also be experienced at a more granular level. And in fact, that is exactly what we're doing every single time we incarnate on Earth. Because the mind is subdivided into energetic zones, which each have their own identity and personality, and which incarnate across our universe so they can learn. And we call these zones of energy souls. Every single person on Earth right now is a soul having a human experience. And if you're awakening, you almost certainly already know this. Where it gets interesting is in the version of the mind we inherit when we're born into a human body. We get extra compartments which are designed to help us survive in this 3D reality. And these compartments are the subconscious, which is the domain of the body, and the unconscious, which is the domain of the ego. Together they make up the lower mind, which only exists in 3D world and which only comes into being when we incarnate. The body is what allows us to interface with this world because remember, we're just energy, we don't have material form. And the ego gives us a way to understand ourselves in this strange walled off environment where society teaches us that we're an individual instead of part of a boundless sea of energy. If we weren't provided with this type of self-image, there's a very real danger that our psyche would just fragment. It would be very difficult for us to adjust to being in a body. Now, the ego is really just a collection of ideas. It's made up of the beliefs we start gathering about ourselves from the moment we're born. Initially, these are things like, I'm human, I'm a woman, my name is Sophia. But as we progress through life, the ego becomes programmed with other beliefs like, I'm good at math, I'm bad with money, or sometimes more damagingly, things like, I always fail, or nobody likes me. So you can see that the lower mind is often the originator of self-limiting beliefs and behaviors. Don't hold that against it because it is trying to protect you. But the challenge is that unless we intentionally take control of our system using the conscious mind, the seat of the earthbound soul, the lower mind calls the shots. And that's not how it's supposed to be. At least not for awakeners. The conscious mind is supposed to be the decision center of the human avatar. So a large part of the awakening process is about relocating control. We do this by reprogramming the lower mind and simultaneously strengthening the conscious mind. Now, this eventually results in a very distinct and positive shift in the way our mind works, which you cannot help but notice. For example, you'll find that your monkey mind chatter disappears. Now, I've covered 3 compartments of the mind: unconscious, subconscious, and conscious. But there's one more that we need to talk about. And this, in a way, is the crux of the whole thing. Because we have a superconscious mind. And unlike the other 3 compartments of the mind, it doesn't exist in the 3D world. It exists in the higher dimensions. Basically, the earthbound soul, the conscious mind, is a fragment of a larger entity, the oversoul. Now, this is what we often call our higher self down here. Sometimes the oversoul and the higher self are the same, sometimes they're not, but I'm not going to go into all of that detail in this video. Prior to our awakening, we experience the superconscious mind as the voice of intuition. Typically, there is just a tiny thread connecting the conscious and the superconscious, so it's very difficult for information to get through. It's constricted. And that's why we just get these little whispers or sudden feelings. But as we progress through awakening, we increase the capacity of this data pipeline. We reintegrate with our higher self. Ultimately, we can have a conversation telepathically as though we're sitting in the same room together. And this is true for all but a very few awakeners who are part of a specific test group in the Global Awakening Project. So to summarize what happens to the mind during awakening, we reprogram the lower mind and we strengthen the conscious mind. Control shifts upwards. Meanwhile, we're progressively reintegrating the earthbound soul with its higher self, and we're opening up communication access to the stores of universal knowledge. And eventually, by the very end of awakening, every part of the mind is integrated and it's operating as one higher vibrational entity. But as I said at the beginning of this video, the mind is only part of the story. To understand the rest, we need to talk about the consciousness. Now, the consciousness is a neutral tool which travels between the zones of the mind, collecting and interpreting the data which is held there. While we're progressively integrating the zones of the mind, we're also expanding the consciousness in a parallel process. We're adding new receptors, which are designed to interrogate the superconscious mind. Actually, I'm just going to say at this point, I'm aware that the consciousness has something to do with mirror neurons, but I haven't been able to button down exactly what the connection is yet. So if anyone watching this video has any theories, I'd be really grateful if you could share them in the comments. What I do know, however, is that you can visualize the consciousness almost as a galaxy. It's spread out across many receptors. The consciousness distributes itself throughout the mind, not just our individual version of the mind, but it can also go further afield into the collective mind. And that's what it does during an out-of-body experience or when we're dreaming. Now, these little points of data collecting particles, which make up our unique consciousness, can spread out or come together, they can sync, they can rise, and they can switch on or off. And this is why sometimes we can say our mind is scattered. And actually, it's not our mind which is scattered, it's our consciousness, which has been stretched out across multiple zones of the mind all at once. And if you have what we call ADHD here on Earth, actually a hallmark of a higher evolved soul, then you'll be very familiar with that feeling. So the data that the consciousness is picking up at any moment in time dictates our real-time subjective experience. If it's lower down, we're picking up ideas from the lower mind. If it's in the middle, we're consciously controlling it. And if it's at the top, then we're probably having some kind of wonderful breakthrough or experience, or maybe we took a psychedelic drug which causes the consciousness to elevate. The consciousness also transfers ideas from one part of the mind to another. And that's how our conscious mind can end up adopting ideas from the lower mind. Now, this is less than ideal because the conscious mind is the seat of manifestation. So if you start consciously believing the things that your ego is telling you, certainly early on in awakening, I always fail, for example, then you're bringing these beliefs into reality. Whereas what we really want to do is to learn to control and elevate the consciousness. Because if we're going to spread ideas throughout our system, then we really want them to come from top down. We want our ego to re-identify as a hyper-intelligent, creative, immortal soul. This is such a powerful idea that it completely changes the way we think about ourselves and the way that we interact with the world. As I said at the start of this video, towards the end of awakening, we begin to see ourselves as a completely different individual. We are completely transformed simply by taking control of the mind and the consciousness. And this is when we start to access our full soul potential. It's when we begin to embody our higher self here in this 3D reality. We become super aware, super manifestors with the store of universal knowledge at our fingertips. Now, the single most powerful tool to help with this transformation is meditation. And this video will tell you all about one of the most effective techniques, third eye meditation.